Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Symphonina Foundation podcast. I am your guest host, Alexander Unseth, one of the Foundation's ambassadors, as well as the winner of the 2023 Best Symphonina of the Year Award competition and runner-up in the 2024 iteration of the competition. And I am truly honored to be joined today by an incredible musician and conductor. He is the founder of A Heretic's Guide to Musicianship and currently serves as the artistic director of the Pittsburgh New Music Ensemble, bringing numerous mixed media productions to life and commissioning and premiering over 140 new works. His conducting credits involve multiple orchestras from amateur to professional, with a strong presence in the youth orchestra and conservatory scene. Please welcome to the podcast, Kevin Noe. Mr. Noe, it is a pleasure to have you. How are you doing, sir?
It's great to see you again, Alex. I'm happy to be here with you.
So I see that you mentioned again, I should note for the viewers, I had the privilege of playing cello under Mr. Noe when he was the conductor of the University of Missouri Kansas City Conservatory Orchestra. And so it's been a journey to get to this point, but I really want to focus in on the journey of you, Mr. Noe. And so I think a good place to start, it's not necessarily the beginning for me, but I really want to know how your journey throughout music. I know you're a trumpet player yourself, certainly took private lessons when you were younger. What do you sort of picture as the main foundational points for you, whether it was as an instrumentalist or beyond, that really got you to where you are today in the music world?
Well, first, let me say, I appreciate you saying that you enjoyed working with me in the orchestra, but I just want you to know I truly felt like I was the lucky one. And honestly, if I could have a whole orchestra of Alex Unseths, I think every conductor would like that. You know, in every section you just look up and it's just a ton of Alexes everywhere. It would be wonderful. The kind of curious mind that you bring to what you do and the positivity that you bring to the exploration of music is something that I think we all gravitate to. So I figure I was the lucky one, and I just wanted to thank you personally.
I appreciate that.
I think if to answer your question fully, I should probably start close to the beginning and say that originally it was music. I mean, my path to music doesn't start with music. I think it starts with the idea of performing in some way. When I was a very small kid, my mother was still doing some acting at that time. She had been kind of let's say a fairly regular actor in the community theater scene and so forth. And I remember going to watch not only her performances, but I watched some rehearsals, and that was what I really thought was super interesting, watching the magic of it all. You know, I didn't understand stagecraft at the time, but I just, you know, one thing would happen and then somebody would say, no, wrong timing, and then a light would do something, and then they'd do it again, and then they'd do this other thing, and then like all of a sudden all these things would lock down and they'd create some kind of a moment, and that moment had some kind of an effect on me. And that was what I thought was really cool. And I suppose that may be the reason that, at least at first, I started into the idea of performing primarily as an actor. There was also, I must admit to you, a young woman, this was in the first grade, her name was Beth Pendleton. And I fancied her. And she was going to be in the school production of Babes in Toyland. And that meant that I was going to be in the school production of Babes in Toyland. And somehow these two influences, you know, brought me into the theater. And I cannot say I had a good experience in all ways in my first show. I mean, I learned a ton. I learned that I love performing. Everything about the show itself was awesome. But I actually... You see, this is the problem when you interview a guest that's very forthcoming about
hey, I mean,
that
is what
all
we're
aspects of their life. Well, I was given the role of the toy soldier, the wooden soldier, and so I stood there at my little hut, method acting, just not moving at all, you know. And what I was unaware of, because when you're a kid, you don't run the whole show, you know, you do little bits of the show. And then you stop and you go get pizza, and then you come back. And when it was time to do the show, that was really the first time we'd ever done the whole show with everybody in places straight through. So I, trying to be a good wooden soldier and truly giving it my all, I stood locked and stiff as a board for some probably 35 minutes before my big number was supposed to come out, and I'm just going to walk down stage and sing. Well, nobody told this poor little kid that locking your knees while you're standing is not a good idea. I had no idea there was a correlation between that and the fact that after about 15 minutes I started to bobble, and I was seeing blue spots, and I was feeling queasy, and nothing was going well. And by the time I hit 35 minutes and it was time to go, I was in real trouble, Alex. I mean, I was in need of near medical attention soon. I was quite a mess. And so out comes the snare drum to announce my moment to walk down stage, and I was like, okay, I finally get to move my legs. So I sprang to life and I started moving, and that felt great at first because now I've got circulation, and and I got down to the end of the stage and I thought, okay, I think I've got this. And I turned and I took a breath and I started to sing, and I made like just half of the first phrase out before I threw up all over the stage.
Oh, man.
I mean, and then the director has to run out and just, cut, everybody stop. They dragged the poor kid off the stage into the dressing room to see if I'm okay. And, the doctor in the house came, and, it was just the most horrifying introduction to the world of performing for others. But I suppose that, I can say without question that is literally the only time I've ever actually thrown up in front of an audience. And so if you start that way, everything is up.
Right. You can only go up from there.
It's only up, And so this is kind of how it started. And I think I learned a lot about the nature of what performing is. And I think about that a lot. I think about the vulnerability of what is required to get up there and perform for people in an audience situation. But to be honest, if you're the conductor or if you're the director, you're performing, in a manner of speaking, you're performing for the group you're working with. By the time I get to the concert, there's really very little for me to do. The audience sees this, they see the persona of what they think perhaps a conductor is, and without the understanding of what's really happened in rehearsals, they have no idea that by that point, if we've really done our job, we could largely not even be there. There might be a few spots that it's really helpful to have us, but chances are pretty good. And then in the case of a great professional orchestra, probably 99% of the playing honestly might even be improved if they weren't there at all. So I learned a lot about vulnerability and the nature of performance and what it meant, and risk taking. And I think those things early on helped define who I ultimately came to be and who I ultimately believed in being as an artist. Because I feel like, despite what I think is taught in conservatories and in training of young minds about how to be musicians and so forth, I don't think the audience pays for perfection. I don't think they're there for perfection. Honestly, I don't even think they know what it is. I'm not sure anybody knows what it is. I'm not even sure why we even use the word. Was it perfect? Did you nail every lick? I don't think the audience cares. I truly don't. There's certainly a limit. I don't play the banjo, and if you handed me a banjo and I went up and tried to hold court for an hour, within 5 minutes everybody would be gone because I don't play the banjo. I can't play it at all. There's a limit. But I think for the most part, that's not why they're there. I think they're there because there's a tremendous risk to reward value of seeing other human beings stand up on the stage who believe they have something to say, and just from the bottom of their heart just trying. And I think the audience appreciates that. I think they appreciate the risk of it, the vulnerability and the exposure of it. And I learned a great deal about that. It actually reminds me I'll skipping forward. I'm a little out of sorts with answering your question, but I promise I'll come back in and fill it in. When I was later on in undergrad at North Texas, we went on tour in Spain. And I remember that I was without my trumpet for 2 whole days because we had to check the bags and they flew. And we were going to get off the plane that day and then go straight to a gig. Now, for a trumpet player, this is just murder. The idea that you're not going to play anything for 48 hours.
Right.
I took my little mouthpiece with me and buzzed away, but I didn't feel good about this. And then we arrived late, quite late, by about 6 or 7 hours late. And by the time we got on the bus and drove to the gig, we could not make it to the gig in time for the show to start. So the gig was supposed to start at 8. We arrived at 9:15. We're the orchestra.
Wow.
We arrived and we're not changed. We're a bunch of kids on a bus, we're not ready. And we get off the bus and everybody's scrambling, and the audience stuck around. I mean, imagine that in America. Can you imagine? No way.
I cannot imagine.
But in Spain, they were all sticking around. They're like, "Hey, we heard you were on your way. We just stuck around." House was full. They just, they had the beers open.
More like nerve-wracking, I'm sure, like to show up and the audience is still there.
Yes, but culturally liberating. Do you know? It says we're here because we love music. That's the way I read it. You know what I mean? I didn't that they were cutting us a break. I was like, they'll be along in a bit. Well, like I don't know. It's something about it. It just was the right thing for me at that time. And so we all scrambled together, got our stuff together. I had barely gotten my tux on. I grabbed my trumpet. I played one note backstage. One. I was like, it didn't sound very good. And the conductor, Anshel Brusilov, walked by me and he looked at me and goes, "No, by the way, I'm changing the order. You're up first." I was playing like a featured sort of concerto style thing. I was playing Quiet City, Copeland. He decided to change the order at the last minute. Hadn't even warmed up. He's like, "You're on first. Meet me backstage in 30 seconds." And I was like, I am destined to repeat my first grade vomitorious introduction. I just could see it all. And I'm standing backstage and I look out and the house is full and the door swings open, and I'll never forget it. It changed my life. I had no idea how I was going to play. I didn't know. I didn't know if the chops were going to work. I didn't know about any of that. I just knew that the audience was glad I was there, and I was glad that they were there. And I owed them something. I owed them my best, whatever it was. I owed it to them, and that was much more important than how I represented myself or how it. Do you know what I mean? Something shifted in that walk from the stage door to the podium permanently in me that changed my relationship with what performing and audiences, what that transaction is about. And by the time I got to my spot, I felt actually quite warm and was really excited about playing for them. And I played reasonably well. I probably didn't. I certainly wasn't perfect. I don't know, but I didn't embarrass myself. But most importantly, every note that I played, I remember thinking I was playing it for them. I wasn't playing, and you were invited into my private space, and if you happen to overhear it, well, then that's up to you. I was playing for you, and it just changed things in me. And to be honest, to this day, I don't think we do a good enough job in conservatory and music school training of really getting young people into the psychology of what we're there for and what it's about and how we go out and do it. We put them in the shed, they're in the practice room, every note has to be this way and this way, and we leave out the audience out of the discussion for a whole host of reasons, and I think that's been very deleterious to our training. So that was my first introduction. Shall I continue, or would you like a rebuttal moment?
No, I mean, I was just going to say, I think your points about the audience are so important. And I know this is something for you as a conductor and just a musician in general. I mean, this is something you focused on and have been consistently focusing on for years. I know there was an interview you did with Atlanta Music Critic back in 2014. It's an interview on YouTube, and I encourage everyone to check it out. But you talk about this idea of a boring performance and how there could be so many factors as to why an audience member or an audience in general might perceive a performance to be boring. And I think to your point where you say, like, you are playing for the audience and we do not do a good enough job of incorporating the audience into that experience. And so of course it comes as no surprise where if an audience member feels like they're sort of just a voyeur to the entire experience, that they may feel very detached and very bored. So to your point, how are you as a conductor, whether it's in the scenarios since that event where you played the trumpet or in the current day, where you feel like you are doing as you preach, like including the audience in these to ensure that they're a part of the process instead of just, something there?
That's a great question. And to be honest, I think I've only been like 50% a success in that and 50% a total failure. That's really what I believe. Let's start with the easy part, the failure part. I think that because of the way conservatory training is set up, it has proven to me to be extremely challenging to figure out ways to address that from within the conservatory and music school model. There are all kinds of reasons, many of which I agree with, that focusing on certain key elements of traditional core training are unbelievably important, without which you cannot do the next part. It's impossible to do so if you don't have the tools, and there's only so many hours in the day, and you have to do what you have to do. And getting an entire orchestra, not just an entire orchestra of 85 people, but all of their teachers at the same time to support any one unified cause is essentially totally impossible. Like you can't get that many people on the same page about anything. And so I think that from my perspective, my life and my work, which has always been, I've always had a foot in one camp as a teacher, and that has been soul nourishing and a deep part of who I am, and without which I would not be Kevin. And another part in a kind of professional performer mode, where I'm walking the boards either as an actor or conductor or singer or director or whatever, and that other part is there, and that's for the audience. And it's an easy way out to just say that I've cleanly divided the two. One is for the audience and the other one is for the students. But that's ultimately what's happened with me. So the part with the students, in terms of how I bring them to the audience, the best I can say about that is that I take great pride and great care and spend an enormous amount of time, as you doubtless remember from working with me, on storytelling through music. I make sure that every person on that stage knows the story that we're telling. They know what's happening here at this moment in Daphnis and Chloe, or The Rite of Spring, or whatever it is, and why it's happening, and what it's about, and how to project that emotion through the instruments. And we talk about that a great deal. That is non-negotiable for me. And playing from the heart and understanding what you're actually playing, when you're playing it, and why you're playing it that way, I think that is the first step towards genuine communication with the audience. In the case of my professional life, in the case of Pittsburgh New Music Ensemble, I was afforded an opportunity to dream more out of the box than that, because I don't believe our responsibility is to ourselves. You know, my responsibility is not to make sure that everybody on the professional team gets what they need as a performer. They're there for the audience. It's the other way around. So we're collectively putting on a professional experience for people. And so when I started with that group in 2000, at the time, the vast majority, and I do mean the vast majority of professional new music ensembles, just played. They would play a piece, they'd stand up and bow, then they'd move the percussion around. That would take about 15 minutes, and then they'd play another piece. Then they'd move the percussion around, and if there was any electronics, that meant another 15 minutes of setup, and this kind of went on like this. And you either liked the piece or you didn't. And this produced an audience, basically, of supporters and friends of the players on stage, as well as the composition community. Of course, there were exceptions to this. There were some audience members who were not musicians themselves and came, but it was a pretty small part of the people who turned out. And so I felt like we should be doing something else. I felt like we should be trying to treat the whole evening as one work of art and make something more of that time. We have the audience there for an hour, 15 minutes or something. I like shorter programs, so we have them there for that amount of time. And if we're lucky enough to have the honor of their attention, and you'll never get all of them, but if you're lucky enough to have the attention of even 50%, you have a responsibility to that, to never let that drop again, because you have a chance to do that one thing that art alone does better than any other thing, which is to rub you up against your own stuck places and allow you to see yourself for who you are. That's a sacred responsibility. I really feel that way. And so when I first started the New Music Ensemble, I didn't found it. My dear friend who's passed away, David Stock, founded it. But when I first started as artistic director, my first thing was to fly to Pittsburgh, because I was living in Austin at the time. I was on the faculty at UT Austin. I was conducting the orchestra there. I flew to Pittsburgh for a long weekend just to sit in the space that we were going to play. And I just went there in the morning about 9, and I sat there until about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and then I went the next day, and I went the next day. I just sat quietly in the space and asked myself, okay, so the audience walks in, and now they sit down, and now what? The lights go off? What if the lights don't go off? What if the lights do go off? What's the difference in the lights going off and the lights not going off? What if different lights go on? What if we pass through a period of black and then they come on? What if we don't do that? What if the first thing that happens is words? What if it's a voiceover? Is it different if it sounds like it's coming out of the speakers? Or should I walk out there or somebody else walk there? What if an audience member spoke? And I kept trying to put myself in the space of an audience member. The great playwright and director David Mamet says every audience member wants to know the same thing. So they all want to know what happens next. What happens next? And what's next? And what's next? And now? And if you're lucky enough to have them on the edge of their seat and you treat that transaction with respect, you can carry them through an evening that can be quite meaningful at times. And that's what I was trying to determine. I was trying to figure out what happens next. Do we just bow and play another piece? Does a clown come out juggling? Do we feed people? What do we do? What's next? What feels right if we played that piece? What would I want to do? I'll give you a perfect example. One time, I had created this program that I called To the Earth that opened with this Frederick Rzewski piece. It's like let's call it an incantation that a solo percussionist plays on their own. And they recite poetry while playing flower pots with these little needles. And it's very humble. It's not in any way, what is the word? It's not virtuosic. It's just the simplest thing. You and we wouldn't be able to play it like a real percussionist, but we could get through it. You know, we a couple knitting needles and play on the little pots. There was nothing terribly technical about it. It was an invocation. It was a way of bringing music into the space. And we went straight from that into the Messiaen Quartet for the End of Time.
Wow.
And I knew that transition worked. You know, like a line is so that I can praise you with my music. But it's not quite clear that means God. It might mean the earth. Praise the earth with my music. And then we start into this masterpiece of Messiaen, Quartet for the End of Time. But I knew it needed to be there. But then I thought, when we get to the end, what are we going to do? Are you going to applaud at the end of the Quartet for the End of Time? Like, oh, that was pretty. I just love that. Thanks. It didn't make sense to me. I just kept thinking, what happens next? And I kept thinking, how can we create a silence there without putting up a flashing no applause sign, which effectively does nothing but stuff your applause back into you and make you feel guilty. Right, so what can we do? I studied this forever, for like 3 weeks. And finally I had this idea, what if the John Cage 433 followed it? What if that was next? What if there was no break and it was just Quartet for the End of Time and all of a sudden we were in 433? What would that be like? And so, suffice it to say, I liked it. It worked. And the shows, people just, they couldn't believe it. They were like, I don't know if I liked the Messiaen itself more or the silence that followed. At moments, it might have felt a little awkward, but there were other moments where it felt deeply reverent and it felt appropriate, you know? But my point about all this is just figuring out what happens next rather than just play a piece. You start with an up-tempo piece, then you play a concerto, then you play the big one, and then I get it. But this is not upholding our duty as artists to think outside the box and provide something more. So that way of looking at it has guided my work with the Pittsburgh New Music Ensemble ever since. And for 20 years, we were absolutely, in my opinion, on the leading edge of doing these kind of theatrical productions that involved the players in costumes giving lines while they performed, other mixed media. Our sound design has been second to none. I mean, the last round of tours that we did in Edinburgh and most of the concerts that we've done in the last 3 or 4 years have all been with the audience in headphones, with us playing around a binaural microphone that we named Michel, where they're totally immersed in the sound that we're making, and it allows us to literally whisper, but right in their ear when we do the things that we do. And I've just been on this kind of relentless path to continue to figure out ways to stir the audience more and more and more deeply. And if I could find a way to bring that together with my work with students, I'd really be having something. Right now, they kind of maintain 2 separate identities. But in the case of the professional group, I'm kind of the CEO, and that does make it easier. in the case of
Right.
in the case of academia, I'm the orchestra director. Oh, I mean the punching bag of the faculty. So it changes the nature of what you can do there. It's not a simple process. But I hope this answered your question in some way.
No, I think your point, well, I mean, you made so many points in that I think are just incredible. I mean, two, it's like the concept of a story and the concept of silence. I know there was, when the COVID lockdowns were about to happen, I recall seeing an orchestra give a performance of 433, and the conductor was, I mean, actively conducting. They weren't
Yeah.
necessarily moving, but you could tell through just like how they were holding their hands, their facial expressions. I mean, it was more than silence because it was silence with a story. And I think to your point, trying to curate the performance so that the audience can feel like there is this linear progression
Right.
of a
That's
story.
it.
And I think, especially in the modern age where we always see these headlines of AI and technology taking over, we see a lot of noise. What do you think is the role for someone like you as a conductor in the next 10, 25, 50, 100 years of being that storyteller, of telling stories that are so uniquely human to where a performance of 433, which is silence, how a performance of silence can actually make people feel connected to one another?
That's a great question. I mean, I suppose the first thing I would say is that I don't fear AI, and it wouldn't matter if I did. Like it's already here. It is going to be what it is, and any active resistance that we have to it will be very short lived. In a few years, it will be so ubiquitous that we won't even think about it. So that's happening, as is the nature of all technology, and almost all technology seems to scare the crap out of us until we understand it more. I mean, can you imagine putting your foot down and say, "I'm never buying a color television"? What about movies? And we're never going to have talkies? I mean, come on. We're going to continue to evolve as a species if we don't blow ourselves up, and that's, we may well do that. But if we don't blow ourselves up, we're going to continue to evolve, and this is part of it. So I think the question is not, will AI take over? The question is, how can you use this really advanced tool to make something even better? And as long as you bring let's say, a human level of sincerity to the task, I think you've got something. But the truth is, if I can go a little dark for a second, I think that the vast majority of let's say, interpretations that conductors put out there today are basically just a copy of somebody else's. That's basically all they are. And to be honest, an AI superconductor, whatever the hell that is, could do just as good a job as the vast majority of them. I truly believe that. As probably 95%. 95% of the conductors out there could be replaced with an AI conductor. I know this is controversial. I'm sure I'll get in trouble for saying it. I don't want it to be this way, and I don't believe it has to be this way. And I'm trying to make I'm trying to create a community that changes things so that it will not continue to be this way. But my honest take on it is that 95% of it is basically just kind of a thin copy of somebody else's thing, which was also a copy of somebody else's thing, which was also a copy of somebody else's thing. And they're largely homogenous performances driven not by the idea of what happens next, what is this story, how can I move these people, what are the roots of this thing, and how do they speak to me personally, and how do they speak to you personally? No. It is guided by this one principle. This is how it goes. You play it like this because everybody does. And I think that is one of the main reasons that we've lost our way. I teach a lot about score study and interpretation. When I talk about how to become better at studying and how to become better at interpreting, I talk a lot about understanding what's on the page. And then I ask the people in the courses, what do you think understanding is? And what do you think interpretation is? And they almost to a person have this kind of vague way of looking at it, that understanding on some level involves facts, and interpretation on some level is some kind of subjective thing. I'm going to see if I can pull up the actual quote for you here in a second. But the idea is that one of them is somehow truth, and the other one is somehow suspect. This is the basic way that we look at these two words. But the truth is, when you look up the definitions of the words, I'm talking about in Webster's and Oxford, they will say understanding is to have a perspective that could then be shared with someone else. In other words, understanding is interpretation. Most of them use the word interpretation when they're talking about what understanding means. Then if you look up the definition of interpretation, interpretation uses the word understanding to describe what it is. And I would say the entire point of score study and interpretation is to understand the pieces, the work that you're dealing with so deeply that you can retell that story in your own voice. That's all we ever get to do. What am I going to do? Retell it in Alex's voice? I can't. I would suck at retelling it in Alex's voice, but you'd be great at it. So I got to retell it in Kevin's voice. I got to understand the core of the story so deeply that I can tell it sincerely from my perspective. I'm not trying to put a stamp on it. I'm just trying to relay what I understand. Seems like a simple thing, but I think this is something that we don't do. It's not a part of the way we think about music making and artistic creation. And I think this has sapped a lot of the individuality out of our work. And I think it has sapped the connection between us and the audience. And as long as we're focused on that, as long as we're focused on people on stage who actually have taken the time to understand the story, the musical story or the dramatic story in some cases that they're telling, they really know what it means to them. And they're trying to share that with the people out in the audience. I don't think we have anything to fear about AI or any of that. I think all that is like yet another thing to avoid talking about the real issue.
To sort of bring it all together, I mean, to your point of like the interpretation aspect of it, there are lots of classical works that are very good examples of humans experiencing some kind of emotion. I mean, it could be extreme happiness, could be extreme despair. I mean, I think probably a very well-known example is Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto, which essentially was born out of the failed premiere of his First Symphony. Or you certainly can see this in Mahler. I mean, you as someone who has conducted Mahler many, many times over the span of your career, there's a lot of human in his music, and there's a lot of context. So to sort of wrap it all together, how important do you feel like the sort of context in which a piece was written is important for an audience to know before they hear it? Do you think that that context actually changes the way that people perceive the music, even though it really is the same music? The only thing that's perhaps changed is what they know about it.
It's an excellent question. I think that in the way that it's normally presented, it doesn't make much difference. In the way that it's normally presented, Mahler wrote this symphony in 1904 when he was in his hut on the Wannsee, and this is like details that you would answer if you were on Double Jeopardy, about the piece. I don't know that those do really anything for you. And what I think is worse about it is that I think people think that it's supposed to do something for them, and so they pretend that it did. There's a lot of pretending in the performing arts on parts of the people on the stage and parts of people in the audience. I think the audience pretending that they like something when they don't is actually one of the single most damaging things we had. I'd much rather hear the truth, But I think to answer your question, I think living into the context would be a different matter. When you have a way to bring the audience into the context, not to give them a factual date-oriented script about some details, but to put them in the place that they should be in order to experience the piece, if that makes any sense. You should absolutely kill yourself to try to achieve that goal. You should wrap them in the kind of context, the emotional context that they are best suited to be in at the moment that the thing starts. Does that make any sense whatsoever? It sounds like a dreamy idea, and most of the time it is. Most of the time it's very, very hard to achieve something like this. But I'll give you one example. This incredible composer that I worked with many times with the New Music Ensemble named Kieran McMillan. We created this piece that we call Drunken Moon. And it's based on Schoenberg's Pierrot Lunaire. Now, this is a very, very famous piece because it's essentially completely atonal. And it is famous for being very, very out there. It's got this hyper-expressionist German poetry, and it's it's like this. I mean, it's a tough sell for a lot of people. It is not famous for being liked. It's famous for being famous. It's famous for being what it is. It's famous for being groundbreaking. But if you ask anyone, do you like the piece? Most people say, well, I mean, sure, it's Pio Lunaire. I'm like, yeah, do you ever put it on at home? And like, no, they don't, they're not interested in actually listening to the piece. They don't enjoy it. Well, we created this thing that we called Drunken Moon, which was a mashup of two different pieces. One of them was by Kieran, and one of them was by Schoenberg. Kieran is an unapologetically tonal, lush, creative, expressive composer. He writes nothing like Pierre Lunaire. The two, you couldn't possibly not notice one style versus another. It seems impossible to that you couldn't tell the difference. But we wanted to create the right context for Pierre Lunaire to be heard in a different way. So we fully staged it. We did what Schoenberg himself said that he would do if he was performing it in another country, which was that he would do it in the language of that country. So we did it in an English translation that we did. Because there is a lot of interesting ambiguity about the perspective of who's talking, and even at times what gender they are, due to the way the poems are incorporated, we decided to split it into two characters. So instead of just a soprano, there is a soprano and a baritone, and they're rotating back and forth who's singing what. This kind of duality is happening. But it's still Pierre Lunaire, note for note, word for word, to the end. We didn't change anything about the score, nothing. And again, we only did it in translation, so that's the only alteration that we made. But again, that was with his blessing. But what we did that was more important was we started the evening with Kieran's piece called Drunken Moon. That's about 35 minutes, like the first half of the thing. And then it goes directly into Pierre Lunaire without any intermission, without any break, without anything, without even a pause. You finish Drunken Moon, and then Pierre just starts, and you just continue on from there. Well, we had set this in this kind of underground pre-war German cabaret. I built a bar with my father on stage, and we were serving drinks. One audience member actually thought it was the actual bar and came up and asked for a drink. We were like, "I'll get you one, but you should know you're actually in the middle of the performance right now." So you know, I opened the show with a kind of fairy tale voiceover description of this woman who had been coming to this bar for years looking for love in all the wrong places, and she was very alone and looking for her white knight in shining armor, and will they ever show up? And on this particular night, they do. This is the nature of Drunken Moon. The reason I tell you this is because we wanted to put the audience, in terms of context, in a situation in which when she starts singing Pierre Lunaire, it doesn't just make you run for the hills going, my God, what's happening? Like, I can't take it. I can't take it. We wanted you to be there. And we decided, what does being there mean? And we needed an entirely new piece to get you there. A prequel to put you emotionally in the space you needed to be in order to participate in Pierre Lunaire. Thus, Drunken Moon. And on the first night, when we opened, Kieran and I, we both agreed, okay, if this works, if it really does what we want it to do, then it might be as much as 2 or 3 phrases before anybody would even notice that now we're playing Pierrot. Like, they'd be so caught up in the story, they wouldn't even notice that for 2 or 3 phrases, that was our goal. And if it was like an epic success, like if it was just knocked it out of the park, we might get out of the whole first movement before people knew we had pulled a fast one on you, and now we were playing Pierrot and you didn't even notice that it had happened. Because the same 2 characters are simply continuing their journey forward. But my friend Alex, what actually happened changed me forever. I will never forget it. It was an everybody out of the pool moment for me. It was like, stop, gotta address this. We played the whole thing down without intermission. Lasted about an hour and 5 minutes. At the end, the whole team comes on stage, a theatrical bow with our hands like this, and we all do a big grand bow, and we get together. The lights are flashing, and everybody's clapping, and da-da-da-da. We're all hugging each other, and then we start to walk off stage. I get back behind the curtain, and I look, and I notice that like more than half of the audience is still sitting in their seats, and I can't figure out why. Usually they get up and come down on the stage to sort of talk to us and look at the cool percussion instruments and stuff, and they're still sitting there. And we waited a little longer, and they're still sitting there. So finally, I just went out on stage and I said, "Hey, everybody," I said, "How'd you like it?" "Oh, we loved it." Da, da. I said, "Well, are you going to come down and say, hey?" And they said, "Oh, no, we're going to stay for the Schoenberg."
Wow.
I'm talking about more than 50 people.
Wow.
More than 50 said, "We're going to stay for the Schoenberg." And I said, "We just played it for you." And he said, "No, you didn't. I know the piece. I have recordings of it." I said, "I'm telling you, we did it in English, but we just played note for note Schoenberg's Pierre Lunaire. But we put it together with this other piece and we framed it in such a way that you didn't view it as an odd relic of atonality or some piece that you're supposed to survive and get through for academic reasons. You were part of the story of the thing, and it was, it's fully staged with costumes and all this." And one guy said, "I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to go home tonight and I'm going to listen to it again, and I'm coming back tomorrow to make sure that I know that you're completely full of it." Next night, we did it. We told the ushers, "Please tell the audience the entire performance runs an hour and 5 minutes. There will be no intermission. When we're done, we're done. There's only one thing." And these two works are put together in a way to make a kind of continuum. So the next night we did it, did the bow, the applause and stuff, and went backstage. And this night there were only like 20 people who were still sitting there, still thinking they were about to hear Pierre Lunaire. And I went back out and the one guy says, "Oh my God, I cannot believe that this happened to me, that I knew this piece, and that because I was viewing it through a different lens, it was like it was an entirely different work to me." So in that case, in that kind of crazy Kevin Noe heretical case, I would say, yeah, context means everything. It changed the way they lived into a piece. But I think knowing that, Mahler had tea while he composed, I don't think that does diddly for you.
No, I mean, I think it's
these too extreme, these answers.
No, I mean, it speaks to your perspective, not only as a conductor, but as a storyteller. I mean, you are truly, dare I say, a visionary who has this new idea about what classical music should be. And I will say it is extremely refreshing. It was incredible for me to play under you. I feel jealous for all the people who get to continue to play under you, but I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time today to tell these stories. I think they're critical stories. And is there anything that you want to plug that you're doing right now, or any future projects that you're looking forward to?
Well, my passion project is the thing that you first introduced me with, which is called A Heretic's Guide to Musicianship. Because I've been a professional conductor most of my life, I have been teaching summer workshops on conducting and so forth. I've done that for many years. And at a certain point, I started to feel like it wasn't enough. It wasn't quite the right format. We weren't talking enough about the right things. I was hoping to attract a slightly different community of people. And so I started this concept, Heretic's Guide to Musicianship, as opposed to Heretic's Guide to Conducting. And we have partnered with the great team at Avalock Farm Music Institute in New Hampshire, which has an incredible mission, and they have built facilities there that are really second to none for this kind of an event. And every year we gather there. It's in June. I think this year it's June 14 to about June 20. We arrive on a Sunday and we leave on a Saturday. And that whole week we spend time with some of the kindest and most talented people I know from all across the country. We get a wide range of people that come. We get a lot of high school and middle school orchestra teachers, sometimes choral teachers or band teachers. We get professional performers who may or may not ever want to conduct, but they want to know more about the art of interpretation, how to study scores and how to think about them and how to tell stories through that. We get composers who want better ways of working with musicians when they get a chance to work with them themselves. That we work on the act of coaching. And I think we are trying, with my incredible wife, Lindsay Kesselman, who's the co-teacher there and truly one of the great musicians of our time. We are trying to get people focused on these very things that you're talking about and give them simple tools that they can take back to their students, because almost all of them are teachers in one regard or another, or give them tools that they can use right there on the stage to reach the audience in a more clear and direct and dramatic and impactful way. And so this project, which has really grown quite a bit, and I'm now getting hired to go do presentations on this idea around the country and stuff. I just did a thing at Midwest about this. This is really very, very meaningful to me. And because I feel like if you can get to the teachers, if you can actually impact the teachers, you can change lives. I go and I do a guest conducting, I do an all-state, I do a thing like this, and I appreciate those times, and I pour myself into them. They're very meaningful to me. But it's a one-off. I'm there a day, 2 days, 3 days, and by the end of the week, they're right back to doing what they do. But if you can get to the teachers, if you can get them some new, genuine content that they can use in the class that really lights students up and makes things more musical, more storytelling-y, you can really change lives. And so I think Heretic's Guide to Musicianship is one of my top things. And I am working on a book that is in tandem with this called Heretic's Guide to Musicianship. And I keep feeling like I don't know enough to write the book. I keep jotting down ideas and I've written about 6 chapters so far, and I keep going, but it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, the ideas and how I'm going to condense it into something that's meaningful, because I don't want a tome. I want to have a little book that's like Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet, but it's like worn out because it's in everybody's back pocket, you know? It's only like 100 pages, but it's like a little paperback thing, and it's like when you think you're going to throw in the towel at the hotel room and you've just conducted an all-state and you just think, I'm not doing well, it's not going well, nobody loves music anymore, what are we doing here? You turn to a chapter in this book and somehow it gets you back off the mat and up and back in the game. Like, that's what I'm trying to figure out how to do, and to distill that into something meaningful is very important to me. That's my current passion project. How about that?
Well, I hope for the benefit of the classical music world in general that book finds its way to completion, because I think it would just be an incredible resource for the teachers and obviously transitionary to the students. But I just want to thank you again, Kevin Noe. It has just been a true pleasure to have you on the podcast, and hope we'll have you back. And thank you again.
Alex, it's a pleasure. I wouldn't rather spend time with any human I know. It's good to see you, man.
Thank you very much. And for all other podcasts, please visit the Symphonina website, and we will see you next time.